Welcome everyone to New York Buddha Dharma, new order of things. Zoom is having its challenges. There are what are called bombings going on, where people show up and show pornography to the Zoom group or play rock and roll music. Yesterday, Westchester Buddhist Center experienced both. So Zoom instituted passwords, and for a few days they were mandatory. Now they're not. So that's why I sent out that email with that special link. That was a link that contained the password. But you don't need it, but it doesn't hurt either way. So stay tuned. The developing world of Zoom technology. The reading for tonight, and the subject for tonight really, is what in Shambhala terms, Shambhala are these, Trungpa Rinpoche was what's called a terton. A terton is a person who discovers hidden texts, which are called terma. These are Tibetan terms. And this is an esoteric area of Tibetan Buddhism. It's particularly alive among the Nyingma sect. The Nyingma sect is one of the four main sects of Tibetan Buddhism. The Nyingma literally means ancient ones, because they trace their lineage all the way back to the 8th century, when Padmasambhava and a few others brought Buddhism to Tibet. It actually arrived in the 7th century, but didn't really take hold until Padmasambhava and Shantarakshita and a few others came and planted it, Vimalamitra. And Padmasambhava in particular, although he's not the only one, felt that he had teachings which were not appropriate for the people of his time. And so he hid them, knowing that they would be discovered in the future. And we're talking hundreds of years in the future, even knowing by whom they would be discovered. The Buddha himself did this. Padmasambhava is usually credited with the idea of terma, but the Buddha also, for those of you who are familiar with, for instance, the Heart Sutra, part of a body of literature called the Prajnaparamita literature, the perfection of wisdom literature, very important in Buddhism. And the Buddha gave the teachings of Prajnaparamita during his lifetime, and then hid them, knowing that after he passed, the circumstances wouldn't be ideal for their propagation. He hid them by giving them to the Nagas. Nagas are serpent deities who live beneath the oceans. They also live in watercourses like streams, rivers, and lakes. But especially the main kingdom of the Nagas is beneath the ocean. And the Buddha gave the Prajnaparamita teachings to the Nagas for safekeeping, knowing that, he died about in the 5th century BC, and then that they would be discovered in the 1st to 2nd century AD. What is that, about 600 years later? By a man named Nagarjuna, whose name literally means conqueror of the Nagas. And Nagarjuna went down to the kingdom of the Nagas. He was a human being, but I guess he was a deep sea diver. And he went down there and he tricked them into giving him the Prajnaparamita teachings, and he brought them back, and that's why we have them in the world. That's the that's the official traditional Buddhist line for you to enjoy. But there are lots of terma, hidden teachings, lots of terma. In fact, in the Tibetan tradition, there are mainly two kinds of teachings: kama, which means word, and terma, which means hidden teachings. Words are teachings of the Buddha and other great teachers, because there are many people who have gotten enlightened, that are passed down through the centuries. And you know what happens when you tell a story, right? And without writing it down, and you just pass it along from one person to the next, it changes. So karma is less reliable than terma, because terma is what they call the fast lineage. It spans centuries without any opportunity to be corrupted. You know, some of them, well, many of them. So the Shambhala teachings were terma. The Trungpa Rinpoche received, or others, the whole idea of Shambhala is very, very ancient. Immortalized in the 1939 film, what was it called? I always forget. Paul
Lost
Mooney.
Horizon?
Huh? Lost Horizon. Thanks, Tim. Lost Horizons. Yeah. Where they travel to Shangri-La. Shangri-La is just a corruption of Shambhala, means an ideal place. And Shambhala was an enlightened kingdom. And that supposedly the Buddha went there during his lifetime, and the king of Shambhala at that time said to him, "Look, you know, we're lay people. We're not going to go become monks. Can you give us a teaching appropriate for us?" And he did, and they all got enlightened. And eventually the kingdom sort of rose and left the earth. And it's in some hidden place. In fact, I have a friend who shares my same last name, no relative. His name is Ian Baker. And Ian is one of the most well-known members of the American Explorers Club. He went to Nepal many years ago to teach American students who were going there for just sort of study abroad programs. And one day he wandered off into the Himalayas and met a yogi and became a Buddhist practitioner, ultimately of the highest order. And he heard about this hidden kingdom, which has another name. Sometimes it's called the Bayul. And the journey to find the Bayul is both a spiritual journey and a physical one. And Ian set out to find the Bayul, and he eventually wound up on a raft expedition down the Yangtze River Gorge, which is the deepest river gorge in the world. His expedition was decimated. The rafts all came apart. And at the point where he could see across the river, couldn't get to it, one of the 4 entrances to the Bayul. This is terrific stuff. And he wrote a book about it, which you can read. It's quite good, called The Heart of the World. Huh. So anyhow, these Shambhala teachings are part of what we're going to be talking about tonight. The Shambhala teachings and the purely Buddhist teachings. See, the Shambhala teachings are not Buddhist. One reason that Trungpa Rinpoche wanted to propagate them was that he felt that there were many people who shied away from Buddhism because they were Catholics or Jews or Muslims, and they felt that this was antithetical to their own religion. But Shambhala is not a religion at all. And people don't even call it a religion. Buddhism is a very strange kind of religion, if you can call it that, because it recommends you don't believe in anything, much less God, but nothing. You know, belief is just not a part of Buddhism. But people still class it as a religion, and some people shy away. I remember the president of Naropa Institute University in Boulder, John Cobb, he's no longer president, was one of those people, and he was a Shambhala person and not a Buddhist. So anyhow, Trungpa Rinpoche gave us these teachings, and they're very beautiful. The Shambhala teachings and the Buddhist teachings share many core principles, and one of the most core is what in Buddhism is termed Buddha nature. And in Shambhala terms, it's called basic goodness or wholesomeness. And what is the idea, as you see, is that we all of us confused sentient beings, have lost track of who we really are. We've become immersed and confused by thought. All thought is about the past and the future. Even when it's about the present, it's about a present that's slightly removed. You can't think about the present. You're just here in the present, right now. As soon as you think about it, there's a slight remove. And that remove creates thought, which is full of anxiety. Thought is all about wanting to make things better, self-improvement. And the flip side of that idea is that things are not good enough. If you feel that things have to become better, they're not good enough, ipso facto. In Tantric Buddhism, this is regarded as the chief evil in the world. And they personify everything in figures in Tantric Buddhism. This concept in Tantrism is personified by a thing called the Gyalgong. The Gyalgong is a conqueror spirit, evil spirit. We all have Gyalgongs up here. What Gyalgongs say to us is, you're not good enough. Don't even try that. Nobody's going to like you. You'll fail. Don't go into that room. They'll find you unattractive. The Gyalgong is always, or it's saying, maybe if you put on more makeup, dress better, change your appearance, then people will start to like you a little more. Not fully, but maybe a little more. And what's behind all that is you're not good enough. That's the main thing about a Gyalgong. It attacks our feeling of worth, self-worth. And it makes us miserable to the extent that it rules. Some people's Gyalgongs are fierce, others are mild. From time to time. Given enough time, everybody experiences the full wrath and perniciousness of the Gyalgong. And the thing about the Gyalgong is this, that it not only attacks me, but when I feel badly about myself, then I don't appreciate this world for what it is. I'm constantly trying to manipulate the things of life to improve the situation. I see my life and situations through a veil of good and bad. And the good and bad means what's good for me and what's bad for me, what's going to improve things and what's going to make them worse. Buddha nature, this basic core principle of Buddhism, says that we are all Buddha. We've just forgotten. We've gotten lost in the Gyalgong, in thought. We trust thought. We give our loyalty to thought. We think all the time. And we think that that thought is really real. And when the teachings tell us come back to the present moment, this is what meditation is all about. We think, yeah, that's a good exercise, but then I got to worry about paying the rent. Then I got to worry about blah, blah, blah. Worry about. Not think about, worry about. Worry about, do people like me? Worry about, am I going to be alone? Worry about my health. Do I have the coronavirus? A frightening thought, right? That's what the Gyalgong makes it. We're all going to die. It's part of Buddha nature. It's part of, and great teachers who have realized their Buddha nature go into death cheerfully. I've told this story before, so forgive me, but if you've heard it, Trungpa Rinpoche loved Suzuki Roshi, who was the master of Zen Center when Rinpoche arrived here in 1970, 71. He was his greatest friend in North America. Loved Roshi. And he would go to San Francisco to teach Trungpa Rinpoche, and he would always make time to go see Roshi. It was a highlight of his trip. And he would rehearse the conversations he wanted to have with Roshi. It was funny, with all of us, his students. And then we, those of us who were with him, would go and we'd listen to this conversation between Roshi and Trungpa Rinpoche. Roshi with his deeply accented Japanese English, and Trungpa Rinpoche with his Oxonian Tibetan accented English. And we sat there wondering, do they really understand each other? But they loved each other. Roshi loved him too, because they were true Buddhists. They were really, at core, I think, as near as I could tell, enlightened people. Roshi died in, I think it was 71 or 2, of stomach cancer. A great irony, in a way, because we all knew that Trungpa Rinpoche's favorite film, movie, which he showed over and over again, he got the reel, and we'd have showings of this film. It's a very strange movie called Woman in the Dunes. I thought it was very strange. Roshi's favorite film was a movie, a beautiful film, if you haven't seen it, Kurosawa flick, called Ikiru, Ikiru, gorgeous. It's about an aging bureaucrat who is living a heartless, meaningless life with lots of people coming to him for help, and he just stamps their papers without even looking at them. Until one day he discovers that he's dying of stomach cancer. Isn't that an amazing irony? Roshi dies of stomach cancer. So Trungpa Rinpoche went to see him while he was in the hospital before he died. And he came back, and someone said, we were sitting around, and someone said, "How is Roshi?" And he said, "He's dying like a true Buddhist." And someone said, "What does that mean?" And Rinpoche replied, "He's curious about his own death." There are so many of these stories about great teachers going into death cheerfully, with curiosity. What's next? So we could cheer up. That's one of the big messages of Buddhist practice. Cheer up. Trungpa Rinpoche used to look out at us and he would say, "Please cheer up. Please cheer up." Now, I always wonder, what the heck is cheering up about, Try it, especially in these days. It can be quite a challenge, but it's good. So Buddha nature, you see, is to realize that we're all fundamentally awake. We don't have to be caught in our thoughts. And in fact, this whole path is about switching your allegiance from the world of thought to this world, the world of the present. There's a tremendous renunciation in that, because what you're doing is you're renouncing all those things. Yeah, all the yeah buts. Yeah, but what about the rent? Yeah, but what about blah, blah, blah. And instead, you're coming into this present moment. That doesn't mean you don't deal with the rent or your health or anything else, but we don't perseverate. Think about it over and over again. How many times do we worry about the things that worry us? Repeatedly. Sigmund Freud said, repetition is the hallmark of neurosis. You can put that on your refrigerator. It's a good Buddhist slogan. So the whole point is to get into contact with our Buddha nature, switching our allegiance from thought, where it lies firmly for us sentient beings who are still confused, to awareness in this present moment. We are floating free in this universe, this endless universe, infinite universe. It's expanding at the speed of light in every direction. And we could float free. Again, Rinpoche said, people were putting this as a tagline on their emails. The bad news is We're falling through centerless space. The good news is there is no bottom. It's full of humor, you know. Humor is so important. Yeah. So in Shambhala terms, this is called basic goodness. I forget the Tibetan, and I don't like the translation, but that's the way it's been translated. It sounds kind of sappy. Um, but it means it's probably having to do with the word sangwa, which is good in Tibetan. Um, Samantabhadra, he's the Buddha whose name means the all good. And I forget what it is in Tibetan, but in Tibetan it revolves around the word sangwa. And it's the idea, you see, that this life is fundamentally worth being here for. All of it. All of it. The coronavirus, everything. Why? For no reason at all. It's fundamentally of value. It's not of value because it will do this or will do that. It's fundamentally worth being here for. That's the idea of basic goodness. It's beautiful. And it utterly defeats the Gyalgong. You see, again, in the tantric texts, there are peaceful and wrathful Buddhas, right? And a peaceful Buddha, we all know, that's like, the Buddha Shakyamuni, when they show him, he's a peaceful Buddha. And then there's Samantabhadra and Vajradhara. And then we got Avalokiteshvara, who represents compassion. These are all peaceful Buddhas. But then there are the wrathful Buddhas, the wrathful enlightened ones. And they are scary looking. They've got, 4 arms and, rolling bloodshot eyes, and they're, flaming hair, and, they're carrying knives and skull cups full of blood, and all kinds of things. They represent the wrath that is necessary to cut through extreme neurosis. My friend Greg Smith, he's a Tonka painter who lives at Shambhala Mountain Center, gave a talk about this once, and he said a pale version of this is like a mother is standing on a street corner with her child, maybe a toddler, and the child starts to step off into the traffic, and she screams, "Get back!" So that kind of wrath. And that's what, in order to defeat the Gyalgong, you have to have that wrath of extreme wisdom. In fact, the most extreme of all of the wrathful deities is a deity called Dorje Trollo. And his main job is to defeat the Gyalgong, that spirit of self-hatred, self-attack. What happens when you are immersed, when you're being victimized by the Gyalgong? The first symptom is depression. We feel depressed. We're falling under the sway of the Gyalgong. And then you come up with all kinds of reasons why you're not good enough. You might set forth on some kind of self-improvement project. You become critical of all those people who share the same so-called faults as you. It always reflects out into the world. And the basic attitude of a person who is ruled by the Gyalgong is self-aggrandizement. We are constantly looking for, how can I bolster myself in whatever ways the Gyalgong is telling us we need to. And so we tend to look at all the situations, not all, but a lot of the situations we move through in terms of what opportunity do they give me for self-improvement, which is a terrible way to live life. There's no appreciation there, no awareness. And this is Buddha nature in Buddhist terms. It's basic goodness in Shambhala terms. The reading for this week was from the 2nd chapter of Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, the book. It's called Discovering Basic Goodness. That was one of the readings. The other reading this week was from The Myth of Freedom. Same theme, a chapter called Fantasy and Reality, because the Gelgong is the world of fantasy, and it's a nasty world. It's like being immersed in a horror movie, a slasher movie. And reality is this world that we come back to in meditation, this world, this open space, which is very kind, really. It's the space of letting be. It has a tremendous generosity to it. When we come back to it, it's gentle and it's full of color, the beauty and the brilliance of this phenomenal world. So he talks about, how do you do this? How do you switch your allegiance from thought to awareness in the present moment? How do you switch your allegiance from the Gelgong, with all of its self-criticism and hopefulness about the future, wishing things were otherwise, to appreciation of this life as it arises in the present moment? There's only one way: meditation. This is what meditation practice is all about. Meditation is about switching our loyalty, our allegiance, from thought and all that it implies to awareness in the present moment. We start from the very minute we sit down on our cushion and we adopt an erect, upright posture. It's the posture of, in Shambhala terms, the warrior posture. This doesn't mean warrior in the sense that somebody goes out to kill people. It's warrior in the sense of being ready for anything, courageous, without fear, without self-doubt. Here's something to put on the refrigerator. Trungpa Rinpoche said, self-doubt is the Buddhist version of original sin. Self-doubt is the heart of the Gelgong. And when you doubt yourself, you're constantly trying to manipulate and change the world to assuage that. So we take a great posture, erect, alive, alert. He says, what did he say about this? Rooted to the earth, solid, sure, confident. It has dignity without being pompous. It comes from being still and simple, still and simple in our posture. So beautiful. Sitting upright, you are proclaiming to yourself and the rest of the world that you are going to be a warrior, a fully human being. Straight back, sitting simply but proudly on the ground or in a chair. A good sense of head and shoulders. Instead of doing this, which we tend to do, especially at my age, to bring your head back a little bit so you've got a nice straight spine. And you can carry this out into your daily life as you walk down the street. It's a good thing, check out your posture as you walk by a window, because we get lost in thought, I do, and suddenly I walk by a window, Starbucks or whatever, and I'm like this, hunched over. And I go, straighten up. So another helpful thing that when I don't actually guide meditation this way, you can label your thoughts, thinking. Whenever you realize that you're thinking, here's the trick. Do not be hard on yourself. That's the Gelgong. There it is. The spirit of self-improvement and self-criticism. The whole trick of what we're learning to do is to be gentle and kind to ourselves. And what that means in terms of thought is you just see it. Kensei Rinpoche used this phrase that I love. Like an old person watching children at play. You watch your thoughts. Huh, makes me teary. It's so beautiful. You watch your thoughts, they come and they go. You can't stop them. You don't want to stop them. That's another form of self improvement. Give up that struggle to stop thought and just come back. See it and come back. That's all our job is. See it with kindness and come back to this awareness in the present moment with kindness towards ourselves. And to the extent that we're kind to ourselves, it will extend out to others. Kindness is so important. This space that we inhabit, that we keep coming back to, is kind. It's gentle. It's full of color, literally and physically, and what's the word I want? Not literally, but figuratively. Sounds are full of color and bodily sensations, all the rest of it. It's vivid. And when you label your thought thinking, you're not doing it punitively. You're just doing it kind of like to help yourself, to see it, to see the thoughts without following them. You're working with your mind and your body. When you have a good posture and your mind is here in the present, the mind and the body are synchronized. When you don't, when you're lost in thought, the mind and the body are not synchronized. The body's doing one thing, it's drinking a cup of coffee, a glass of water, and you're thinking, what's for tomorrow? Am I going to be sick? Am I going to pay the rent? Your mind and body are out of sync. The whole practice of meditation is to bring them totally into sync. Mind is here in the space of this present moment. It's not that I'm looking at the computer screen. The computer screen is self-known. All of this is self-known. It's arising as self-known in this present moment. And we come back into this space. We come back into real knowingness and out of thought. Thought is a secondary comment. Thought is what we call the hitchhiker, the watcher. It's watching what we're doing. And it's a hitchhiker because it's extraneous, it's unnecessary, it's catching a ride and making extraneous comments. That's good, that's bad. I think of it as like a parrot. That's good, that's bad. And it doesn't mean anything. How about that? You can give up thought and still be really smart and pay the rent. So meditation in the Shambhala tradition and in Buddhism is designed to educate people to be honest. Thought is not honest. And genuine, true to themselves, true to what we actually are as we sit here without any effort. We're full of heart and intelligence, all of us, each in our own unique style. He says in that chapter, therefore, meditation practice is regarded as a good and, in fact, excellent way to overcome warfare in the world, our own warfare as well as greater warfare. When you sit and meditation will bring up all your fears, your irritations, your disappointments, negativities. That's fine. It's a laxative. And you don't feel like this is bad. You see them. You welcome them like children at play. Don't get caught up in them. When you do get caught up in them, and when you wake up from that, you see them again as just thoughts. Just thoughts. They don't mean anything. They're just thoughts. They're the Gyalgong playing. He says in The Myth of Freedom, we must first work with our fears, frustrations, disappointments, and irritations, the painful aspects of life, cultivating the roots and trunk of the tree before we can pick its flowers. We really have to see all this. And that people think that, meditation is meant to pacify you. They think it's a sedative, but it's not. It's a laxative. It brings up all that stuff. How? By creating this open space of boredom. That space, this big space, boredom is a complaint. You can let that go too. And then the space becomes cool boredom. When it's hot boredom, it's a complaint. I don't want to be here. I want entertainment. And then ego gets into it. But eventually you begin to relax into this space and it becomes cool boredom. And then you can see thought as it arises and passes away. He says meditation is a vehicle without a reverse gear. Simplicity. We realize that there is no escape and give in to being right on the spot. That's what happens again and again in meditation. You keep thinking, I want this to end, I want this to end. And then you think, I got to stop saying that to myself because it makes it really painful, And then you stop and you can actually relax into the space. Just a couple more things. He says, becoming aware of emotions and life situations and the space in which they occur might open us to a still more panoramic awareness. A compassionate attitude, a warmth develops at that point when we begin to really allow our minds to play and without indulging them. So that's pretty much it. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over. And I'm going to unmute yourselves one by one. We've discovered doing Zoom that it's better if everybody stays muted because we were so unaware of the sounds that our environment produces from time to time, randomly. And just unmute yourself when you want to speak.
Hi, John. I had a question.
Mark.
Hi, everybody. When you said that self-doubt is the original sin, I was just wondering if you could talk about what are then some of the remedies for self-doubt? What garners confidence?
Meditation. You see, you could look at it this way. When Adam, ate the apple, what he was doing was, it was the apple of I, of self-awareness and worry about me, which is full of self-doubt. Ego, the sense of I, is riddled with self-doubt for a good reason. It doesn't exist. It's a lie. It's a falsehood, the story of I. I is just a fictional creation like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. But we've believed it, this whole drama of I. It plays out on our television sets, in the movies, in novels that we read. They're sort of versions of the little stories we tell ourselves, the dramas about ourselves all the time. I've got to worry about the coronavirus. I've got to worry about paying my rent. I've got to worry about being alone. I've got to worry about I. I is fundamentally self-doubt. As soon as we say I, we are doubting the existence, the health, the vitality, the validity, the truth of that statement. That's why it's the original sin, self-doubt. It's I. And when you come back into the present moment fully, just coming back into this space of awareness, I disappears, and so does self-doubt. There's just this. So that's our practice. To do it again and again, and to begin to realize that we can function in this world without worrying. Those habitual, repetitive thoughts about I, all of them were about I. Every one of them. Even if we're worrying about the world, it's because I doesn't want it to go in that direction. This is the Buddhist perspective. Makes sense to me. I don't know. What do you think? You can press your space bar and you unmute yourself if you have a space bar. And if you don't, click on the icon. No?
No, that makes total sense to me. I had one other sort of unrelated follow-up. Could you talk just a bit more about, I've never heard this distinction between Shambhala and Buddhism. Could you just talk about that a little bit more? I've never heard it distinguished as distinct in a way.
When Trungpa Rinpoche received these terma, the Shambhala teachings were all terma, he would, there are two kinds of terma, mind terma and earth terma. Earth terma are the teacher who's got the teaching. He plants a physical object, knowing that it will be discovered in the future. It might be a text, it could be a statue, it could be anything. And some point in the future, the Terton finds it. And as soon as they touch it, the teachings flood into them. If it's a text, it'll be written in Dakini script. Dakini are the fierce female energies of life that there are different levels of Dakini, but the highest level of Dakini are enlightened and they are fierce and dangerous, and they represent pure feminine energy as opposed to pure masculine energy, which is Daka. Ordinary human beings, we have a mix of both, most of us. If you ever met somebody who's a pure Dakini or a pure Daka, it would be quite remarkable. They're there somewhere in the world. And so it's written in Dakini script, and when the Terton finds it, they touch it, and as soon as they start to read it, it's disappearing. So they call it pen and paper, and they start writing it down as soon as they can. With a mind terma, it just comes through the Akash. Trungpa Rinpoche received both. And when they come through the space, he would just suddenly realize he was receiving. It's like being a radio station. And he'd call for pen and paper and start writing. It looked like automatic writing. And this whole text, these gorgeous texts would come out. If you happen to have the book, Shambhala, The Path of the Warrior, terma are regarded as sacred and secret. You have to go through trainings before you are given the text to own and read. But he allowed the first page of one of the important texts called the Letter of the Black Ashe. He allowed that to be printed in Shambhala, The Path of the Warrior. You can see it there. It's at the beginning of the book. When you're looking at a terma text, in Tibetan or in English translation, if it's terma, at the end of every line, there will be a little symbol that shows that it's terma. And the symbol is a horizontal line with a circle above and a circle below, very small, right at the end of the line of text. Every line of text will have that. If you want to experience a terma, the first Thursday in every month, we chant the sadhana of Mahamudra online. You can find it on the Shambhala website. And that's a terma. On the Westchester Buddhist website. And that's a terma, and it'll be scrolled on screen. You're not allowed to own the text until you have done a 2-day training with someone who's authorized to do that. And then you can buy the text. But in the interim, you can read it in a meditation center. You'll be handed it, the text, and you can turn it back at the end. Or in our instance, it'll be scrolled on screen. We did it for the first time using Zoom at the beginning of April. And that's a terma, and you'll see those little symbols. So why was the question? I've lost track. I'm
I,
sorry.
just to talk about the distinction between Shambhala and Buddhism. So,
Well, Buddhism has plenty of terma. That's not the distinction. The distinction about Shambhala is that it's about a lay kingdom that became totally enlightened and embodies the principles of enlightened society and a bunch of other teachings that are not there in the normal Buddhist teachings, like the teaching of Great Eastern Sun, the teaching of basic goodness, the teaching of cocoon. These are, if we were to do Shambhala training levels, you would learn these. Great Eastern Sun is the principle that the world is always, always, in every instant, arising fresh, new, alive, enlightened. It's like the sun constantly rising. Setting sun is mentality, is about the mentality that is ruled by the Gelgon, that is constantly afraid of the light disappearing. Right? So there are all these concepts that are part of Shambhala that aren't part of Buddhism. And but I once heard Kensei Rinpoche, Dogo Kensei Rinpoche, probably the greatest teacher of my lifetime. You know, the most famous. All the Tibetans adored him, of every sect. You know? And when Trungpa Rinpoche died, Kensei Rinpoche came to Boulder and taught. We went to Karme Churling and taught. That's in Vermont. And then he went up to Halifax and taught. And I heard him both in Boulder and in Halifax. And during the Q&A in Halifax, someone asked him, what is the relationship between the Shambhala teachings and the Buddhist teachings? And he answered in no uncertain terms, the Shambhala teachings are Dzogchen. Dzogchen is the highest level of Buddhist teaching. It's called great perfection. See, the Buddhist teachings are, especially in Tibet, were divided into 9 stages called yanas, vehicles. And we start out in the Hinayana, which literally means lesser vehicle, but which Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to translate as foundational vehicle, because there's nothing wrong with it. And then you go from that to the Mahayana, which is the path of the Bodhisattva, the person who discovers emptiness, shunyata, and is freed from suffering, not fully enlightened yet, and is able to help other sentient beings and inspired to help other sentient beings. And then from the Mahayana, you go to the Vajrayana, Tantrayana, Mantrayana. All those are synonyms for the same thing, just emphasizing different aspects. Tantra, call it. People think Tantra has to do with sex. Came up just again. And there is sex in Tantra, but it's this thing from Hinduism that carried over. When I first went to Boulder in 1970, there was a condominium development there that someone had named Tantra Estates. I figured it would help sell the condos. You know, people would think they were going to live a sybaritic life when they moved in there. But that isn't it. Tantra is all about the extraordinary meaningfulness of life as it arises in the present moment, and that it's constantly communicating its meaning to us in ways that until we can see it, we don't see it. And that's the last of the 3 major yanas, and there are 6 subdivisions within that in the Nyingma scheme, 4 in the Kagyu. Kagyu was Trungpa Rinpoche's sect, but he had the Nyingma lineages as well. And there's 6 main subdivisions, of which Dzogchen is the highest. And in fact, there are some Buddhists who say Dzogchen goes beyond Buddhism. It's so pure and simple and powerful. So Kensei Rinpoche said, the Shambhala teachings are Dzogchen. And they're geared for lay people. The Buddhist teachings I go to Buddhist teachings pretty much every year. And there are monks and lamas who come to those teachings, as well as lay people like me. And the monks and the lamas sit up front with the clergy, and they're given places of honor. That's not the way it works in the Shambhala world. That's the way it works in Buddhist world. So there's that distinction.
Thank you.
In terms of, I wanted to tell you one last story that's funny. This is from the lore, having to do with our Buddha nature and the way we don't see it. And the story goes that Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu, the three Hindu gods, the Trinity, Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the sustainer, and Shiva is the destroyer. And they're sitting around up in heaven and they're looking down on earth. And Brahma gets an idea. He says, I think I'm going to go down there and explore. And he goes down and he takes the form of a human being. And he's exploring around and he forgets who he is. And the human being that he is dies, as all human beings do, and is reborn, as all human beings do. But eventually, through a series of births and deaths and rebirths, he winds up becoming a pig. Brahma, God, right? So Vishnu and Shiva are up there in heaven watching all this, and finally Vishnu says to Shiva, look, can you do something about this? So Shiva says, sure, and he goes down to earth, finds the pig, takes out his sword, slits open the pig's belly, and Brahma steps out and basically says words to the effect of, thanks, I needed that. He's reminded, he rediscovers who he actually is. And that's a metaphor for all of us, the rediscovering Buddha nature. We've gotten lost in the Gelgong. And if you come to do the Sadhana Mahamudra on one of those first Thursdays every month, the Gelgong's in there. And Dorje Trollo, who kills the Gelgong. And in fact, Dorje Trollo's job isn't just to kill the Gelgong, it's to butcher the Gelgong. I love that.
Hey, John.
Hi, Marie.
So when you explain how we define anxiety and feelings,
I'm not hearing you. What?
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Yeah, so I was saying when you explain how we have to deal with anxiety and emotions, how we have to feel them and just staying present and everything, what is the approach when you have a physical pain, like when something is bothering you, like in your body? What is the Buddhist approach towards?
Same thing. But at the same time, there's transcendental common sense, as we call it. That means is if you've got a pain, something might be wrong physically, you need to take care of it. Transcendental, because this body is very, very important. It's the vehicle that we have for treading the path, as is our home and our livelihood and all of that. That you don't just throw that away. That's your vehicle. Transcendental common sense. In order to practice and study and tread the path, we need to keep all of these things functional, healthy, reasonable.
What about the chakra system and like blockage? What about the chakra system and blockages of energy? Like, is there something like in Buddhism that you can apply?
Yes. There's a whole realm of Tantrism, which nobody here, I think, I don't know everybody here all that well. Probably, if we're engaged with just sitting meditation, we're not into Tantrism yet. In Tantrism, there are two main paths, the path of wisdom and the path of means. The path of wisdom is largely what we're doing here. And it leads all the way to Dzogchen. The path of means is somewhat different. That has to do with working with the subtle body of chakras and channels and winds and the bindus, the essences, you know. There are 10,000 or 20,000 channels in this body carrying winds, prana, lunta in Tibetan, prana in Sanskrit. They're called nadis, these channels. And there are practices you can do, you know, if you want to learn that, but you need someone to teach you. Also, I'm just looking around. There are a few gray hairs here. Hi, Tony. And as you get older, the path of means fades for older people because it involves some very strenuous exercises, which sometimes involve shocks to the body. So it's better when this is done by a younger, healthier person. But you need to have someone teaching it. And there aren't that many people who are qualified teaching it. A few, definitely. And in order to get to that, you have to become a Vajrayana student. That means that you have to, the basic steps are that you make a relationship with the teacher. You get to the point where you know that this is your path. You take refuge first and then bodhisattva vows. And then if your teacher approves, you start doing the preliminary practices. They're called nundra. And the preliminary practices are, traditionally, 100,000 each of 4 practices. Actually 108,000. You go through a mala, which has 108 beads 1,000 times. Bogdan, you know this, right? I see you're nodding. The first one, people generally refer to as prostrations, although it actually is more properly referred to as taking refuge. You're doing both. A prostration is you're standing, you go all the way down to the floor, stretch out with your arms out, stand back up again. That's a prostration. You're prostrating yourself on the floor. And there are techniques for doing this so that you don't kill your body. And as you age, you can't do it anymore. And there are workarounds for older people if they want to do nundra. They can do 3/4 prostrations where you don't go all the way down on the floor, or even half prostrations where you're just bending from the waist, and even tabletops where you just do it on a tabletop. And especially for pregnant women, that's a bass. You can do that. It's much easier. It's by far the easiest. And while you're doing it, you are chanting the refuge formula. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, and so forth. And you are doing a visualization of the whole lineage tree. And if you're good at visualization, they say, and I'm certainly not that good, you can visualize all these deities, and there are lots, right down to the pupils of their eyes. I think that's funny. And then the second prostration is you chant the Vajrasattva 100-syllable mantra. And again, there's a visualization. You're visualizing Vajrasattva on top of your head. And there's a whole thing about that. And it's a purification process exercise. And you are purifying dikpa and dripa, which are the 2 main kinds of impurities that we carry around: neurotic crimes and sins of self-confidence, lack of self-confidence. And you're purifying all that. It's washing out through you. And then the third one is you do mandala offerings. You have a plate, you have a basket, you create a mandala you have a big basket full of rice, you have saffron rice with semi-precious stones in it that you get, and you make a mandala on a mandala plate, special plate, copper plate. And you do that 100,000 times again with visualization. And then the fourth one is the fastest one, and that's the Guru Yoga. And you say a Guru Yoga formula, which is very short, 100,000 times with visualization. And once you've done all that, then you are a candidate to receive more tantric teachings. They are tantric teachings, the prostrations, and the Vajrasattva and all the rest. Nundra is tantric teaching, but and it's not trivial. It's not like some kind of just something you want to blow through. To give you an idea, a great Buddhist teacher who lived in the 1700s. I'm sorry, senior moment. He wrote the book Words of My Perfect Teacher. Anybody help me? I'm sorry, it's one of the great texts of Buddhism. Although it's also Buddhist fundamentalism. It's fire and brimstone Buddhism. So you might not like it. I loved it, but he did prostrations 60 some odd times in his lifetime. So he did Nundro 60 some odd times. I mean, that's really something. Nundro will take you probably, since you're working and everybody, a few years. Trungpa Rinpoche wrote a poem about doing prostrations. It was called Oceans of Sweat, appropriately titled. So yeah, then you get to tantric teachings. And when you get to Tantra, you will do, at some point, you will have the opportunity to do the path of means practices. The most famous ones are in the Kagyu sect, connected with the teachings of Mahamudra. There are the 6 yogas of Naropa. These 6 yogas are definitely path of means. And they have to do, the first one is inner heat. You raise inner heat in your body. It's the first and most essential one. So.
Quite a long journey. Huh? Quite a long journey.
But worth it. I mean, it just gets better because what it's doing is making our lives more wholesome every step of the way. And when you say long journey, yeah, by the numbers, it's long, but there's no telling. In this room, some people will take multiple lifetimes. Some people might get it just like that. They're few, but there are the people who are called instant realizers. They've accumulated so much background and karma in their past lives that in this life, all they have to do is just hear a breath of the teachings and they achieve enlightenment. Those people are few, but they're around. So there's no telling. And you can't be pessimistic about yourself because that's the Gale going again, number 1. And number 2, you have no idea. None of us do how fast or how slowly we're going to get it or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you, John.
You might be the one who's going to get it tomorrow. Then you can teach us all.
Oh,
or not. Or not. Actually, then you become a dumb Buddha. If you haven't studied and you just get enlightened like that, that's it's great. Of course, you're enlightened, and that's nothing better than that. But at the same time, you don't have the background, the training to help you help other people as well, as if you've trod the path yourself. Although people who get it because they just click like that have accumulated so much in their past lifetimes, and they suddenly might remember it all. There's this great story. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. In the 19th century, late 19th century, there were 3 very important teachers. The most important of whom was they were all incredible, but his name was Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo. And in fact, Dilgo Khyentse, who just died in 1990s, was his reincarnation. Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo was a great Teratan. And there's another one, I forget his name. He and this other guy once received a mind terma. They were in different locations and they wrote it down. And then they got together and compared, and they had the same exact word for word text. Isn't that amazing? Supposedly. So Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo realized at one point that he didn't channel, he was a 14th century great teacher named Chetsun Senge Wangchuk. And at the moment that he realized this, all these teachings came flooding into his mind, and he wrote them down. So maybe somebody gets enlightened and they just remember all these teachings that they had from previous lifetimes. I personally just love this Nyingma stuff. It's so magical, and full of humor and magic and delight. Okay. Any other questions, comments, complaints? Tony, you haven't said anything. You're muted.
Me?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. I was nice to be here for my first time. I have another path in my life that showed me something important that really relates a lot to what you've been saying and kind of kicked the door open for me a little bit. And that is, we have an expression we use from time to time that says, I don't think much of myself, but it's all I think about, which is,
I like that. Leanne likes it.
It's to do with the self-esteem. It's to do with, it's almost like our society in many ways, our Western world is through schooling and competition and whatever is almost structured to create these challenges to self-esteem. And a further thing that I have been thinking about recently, I read something that said that, that the fundamental core of addiction is avoidance of the present moment. It's about living in the future or living in the past. And I thought, that's very meaningful. To me, it was very meaningful that someone had realized that. So they're my couple of little snippets. I just have one other question. Is that a Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche calligraphy on the wall there?
It is.
What does it say?
It says, go.
Go. I got to frame one years ago for some people that bought one, and I gave it to them, and I said, what does it mean? And he said, don't wait in ambush. And I said, what does that mean? He said, you'll find out. Thanks.
I'll tell you that one, don't wait in ambush. That's one of the Lojong slogans. A great teacher went to Tibet in the 12th century. His name was, God, I'm having all these senior moments tonight. I can't believe this. He'll come. And he taught, and he had a famous student who took his teachings and he codified those teachings into 57 slogans. And one of them is that one. That's one of the 57. And there's a book on it Pema's written on about it, Pema Children, but also Trungpa Rinpoche has a whole book on the slogans, and they're wonderful. In fact, I've got a deck of cards about this big that I keep on my puja table, my meditation table in front of my shrine, and it's got the 57 slogans. And not every day, but every once in a while when I'm inspired, I just pick a new one out of the deck at random to see what it's going to tell me today. Today's one was, don't be jealous. That's one of the easier ones to understand. Some of them are pretty cryptic, and you need to read the book to understand them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, everybody, we should probably end. Thank you all. A lot of people I haven't heard from. Melody, I hope you're there. And there was somebody else who left, but okay. Lane, we don't hear from because he doesn't have a camera and mic, but he texts us to let us know he's around. Please email me. I put my email in the chat. If you would like, it's important if you want to come back for a couple of reasons. One is the whole thing with the Zoom technology is changing daily because of this issue with meetings being so-called bombed by outsiders. And the second thing is that I will send you from time to time. So for instance, if you send me your email tonight, I will send you the readings for next week in PDF form. And I'll do that every week, if you wish. So that's it. Let's end with the dedication of merit. And again, I can't put it up on the screen. I'm using Val's computer because I was having problems with mine. And I don't have it on this one. But for those of you who know it, we'll just chant it together. By this merit,
may all attain omniscience.
May it defeat
May
the
defeat the enemy wrongdoing
from the stormy
waves of birth,
old
age, sickness, and death.
From the ocean of
samsara, may it free all beings.
By the confidence
of the golden sun of the great east.
May the lotus
garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom.
May the dark
ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you all.
Thanks, John.
Tony, where are you?
In Connecticut. I'm in Lakeville, Connecticut. The tri-state area where the three states come together here.
And how did you happen to know the Shambhala chant?
Well, I spent a bit of time in Karamacholi.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, lovely to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. What was that Sigmund Freud quote again, please? Could you just remember that?
Yes. Repetition is the hallmark of neurosis.
Repetition is the hallmark of.
And Sigmund Freud is very big in our lives, whether you know it or not. Because when Trungpa Rinpoche came here, he decided that the best vehicle for translating Buddhism into the West was Western psychology. And so he adopted a lot of the language of Western psychology, including ego. Now, ego is a Freudian term. It's actually, Freud never used it. What happened was that when he designated his official translator, and only James Strachey could translate the works of Sigmund Freud into English for many, many years. That restriction has lapsed, in the time limit on it. But for decades, many decades, only the translations of Freud done by Strachey were printable. And Strachey decided that he wanted to try and make Freud more acceptable to the American medical establishment, especially the AMA. So he translated a lot of terms which Freud just spoke in ordinary German into Latin and Greek. So you get ego, that's Latin. You get catharsis, cathexis, that's Greek, and other terms like that. So Trungpa Rinpoche adopted those. When we talk about ego, it's the translation for Atman in Sanskrit. And he actually, Trungpa Rinpoche is credited in the Oxford English Dictionary with having invented the word egolessness.
Oh,
Interesting factoid. Well, everybody,
thank you, John.
and if anybody wants to talk about anything, their practice and so forth, just let me know. I'm got endless availability.
Thank you.
And I'd love
Thanks
to
a
talk
lot,
to you.
John. That was beautiful.
Thank you. It was beautiful.
Wonderful to see you all. Thank you, John. Everybody,
Thank you for the
have a
food.
good night. Stay safe.
Who
Bye,
say?
everybody.
Right.
Nice to see all.
Thank you.